Everybody.
Hello everybody. Hello from Georgia. My name is Vanessa and today I'm your tech support. I'm greeting you from organizing team of Virtual World Community Development Conference 2022. And before we start, dear friends, many of our participants are from Ukraine. They're based in the war zone, or they're refugees in different countries, and it might be very difficult for them to join the session. And moreover, we have participants from 59 countries, and it is impossible for everyone to participate all the sessions because of the different time zones. And that's why it is very important for us to make a record of this session for our colleagues. And it turns out that this presentation, this workshop is not just for people who are here in this virtual room, but for many people who would like to know about the experience but don't have a chance to connect right now. So if for some reasons you do not want to be on the record, please switch off your camera and enjoy us. So I'm giving the floor to the host of this workshop. I will be the tech support. So Michelle, up to you.
Thanks, Vanessa, and thanks, Kate. I'll get Vic to start us off, but before I do, welcome to our intersectionality of ABCD, or asset-based community development and trauma-informed community building session. So over to you, Vic, to start us off with our acknowledgement to country.
Acknowledgement to country, yes. Thank you, everybody. Today I come to you from Darug land, part of the Guringai Nation of the Darungai language group. I also acknowledge the land on which you all come from. I also like to acknowledge the lands you also come from. I wish to acknowledge over 65,000 years of custodianship of this land and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I honour the spirit of wisdom of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across Australia. I'll strengthen community with learning, culture and spirituality and ensure that together we continue to connect and grow as one. The Edda Institute acknowledges that the lands of Australia were never ceded and commits to ongoing truth-telling, awareness and reconciliation. Michelle, would you like to introduce yourself today?
Yeah, sure. Kate, I'll just get you to click on to our intro page. Keep going forward. Yep. Fantastic. So I'm Michelle Dunscombe. As you can see, you've got all our little faces there. I live on Tanarung country and also acknowledge the elders of this land and pay my respects as well. I am an asset-based community development practitioner based in regional Victoria, and sort of stumbled into some trauma-informed work because I do live in a community that was affected by a major bushfire back in 2009, and found that trauma-informed approach to working with community was certainly missing during our recovery process. And it's through that work that I actually happened to meet Dee and Fiona many, many moons ago, and we've started working together. So I'll hand to Dee. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Michelle. I'm coming to you from Brisbane in Queensland in Australia tonight. I'm in a funky hotel room. I'm here for one night before I go back to Victoria, down near where Michelle is. And I'm also an ABCD practitioner and have been for over 20 years. And it's something that I think is, once it's in your blood, or once it's, you know, your mind shift, you can't go back. And I just absolutely love working alongside communities and helping them discover their special treasures, their hidden treasures, and the things that they have to offer each other and their communities. So yeah, with Michelle, we've worked and traveled through about 22 different countries, and I just love hearing stories from people as well. So I will hand over to Vic to introduce himself.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm Vic, and I'm passionate about marginalised communities and helping them through inclusion, and also around people with disability, acquired and otherwise. And currently I'm a director of a not-for-profit organisation that supports people who have a disability with housing. And really, I like to focus on self-management and next stage organisation structures, and particularly around use of person-centred practices. And I also love ABCD, but I'm a little newer than these guys, but I love the way it intersects with other philosophies. Can I pass over to Fiona to introduce herself?
Thanks, Vic. Hi, everyone. I'm Fiona, and I live on the Canamalooka River in Tasmania, so the north of Tasmania. As Michelle said, I met Michelle during the bush recovery years that we were spending some time in the same places together. I love people, I love passion, and I love our little people. And I'm really, really focused on how we can make spaces and places happy, encouraging, and places of education, no matter what that looks like, for our youngest people in the world to move forward, and hope that we can share our knowledge with them to grow. But at the same time, I really like to have fun. I'm a bit of a party girl, so I do like to have fun in all the places I'm in, and enjoy facilitating and doing anything participatory with grassroots communities. And I am very, very honoured to be here today, sitting still and a part of this work. I think over many years of the work I've done, trauma has always been in the space. It's never always been named as trauma or recognised as trauma. And one of the reasons I'm drawn to the trauma-informed intersectionality with ABCD is because I think that part of the recovery and being aware of it is being aware of the assets in community and what communities have also to build, and being in trauma-informed, not just as practitioners, but how we can work together. So thank you for having me here tonight, and I'm going to hand you over to Kate.
Thanks, Fiona. And I'm Kate. I am also new to ABCD. My past, or my experience so far has been with disabilities and inclusion. There's lots of intersectionality with trauma-informed practice with disabilities as well, and that comes back into community building and ABCD. So definitely something that I am still in the process of learning about, but in the deep end. And I'm also doing the slideshow, so you'll have to excuse if I'm a little bit slow, because it's the first time I've done a slideshow. So in the deep end of learning with a lot of things, but we'll get there. So back to whoever is next, which I can't tell because I don't have a flow in front of me. I'm sorry. And please prompt me, girls, if I need to move on more quickly.
Okay, this is back to Vic here. Like to introduce you with a check-in question. Introduce yourself and what brought you to this session. And if you could respond in the chat, that would be great. Thank you.
Just while we're waiting, Kate, do you want to move us on to this slide is actually not the right slide. Sorry. So whilst people are waiting and adding where they're from in the chat, yeah, or maybe we will just leave it like that. Apologies, folks, for a bit of a little bit of a mix up. Right, thanks for adding Alison and Louise, Jaya, Martin.
Would anyone like to share what they've written?
I'm happy to.
Okay, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Louise. I'm the head of community services for a UK-based charity called Independent Age, and we work supporting older people over 65. And yeah, I was really drawn to the session because increasingly we're focusing on supporting older people who have lived experience of poverty, so who have grown up in poverty, led their lives in poverty, and are now experiencing a later life in poverty. And to put it bluntly, I don't want to put my foot in things. I don't want to make things worse. I don't want to re-traumatize people. I think it's really important that we reflect all the time on our practice. So that's why, yeah, I'm here hopefully to get some insight into how you've navigated that, and hopefully that will help me and my organisation.
Thank you, Louise. Would anyone else like to offer their contribution that they've written? Everyone to hear?
I'm happy to share.
Thank you. Thank you, Jaya.
I, along with a couple of colleagues of mine, set up an organisation called Indian Care to support the Indian community in Victoria. And family violence is coming up as a big issue. So while I used community development principles and practices to set up the organisation, I'm not so well informed about, you know, those quite traumatic experiences. So I'd like to understand how the intersection of my understanding of community development and asset-based community development can work alongside some very deep problematic issues.
Thank you, Jaya. Fiona, would you like to take us to the next section, please?
Thanks, Vic. So when we were putting this workshop series or this together, this is a slide that we've had and used before, and it keeps telling me a story. And I like to use images because I think images do tell lots of stories that words can't sometimes. And so when we were talking about putting this together, I thought that this was a great slide to start with. And I'll happily read out the quote as well. So trauma impacts the entire person, the way they learn, the way they remember things, the way they feel about themselves, feel about others, and the way they make sense of the world. And I think all of these things in that statement alongside that image remind us that we can't see the person. We can't see the trauma. We can't, we don't understand it from the way they've experienced it. But what we can do is actually be really aware of the way we interact with people and reserve judgment of people. So I just thought it would be really good to have a discussion around this image and your thoughts on the image especially, and the statement. And basically, for me, what does me asking you, if we're working in community and we need to understand more and be more compassionate, what does a compassionate community mean to you? What does that mean for you working in a community or being part of a community? So I believe there's a slide deck for the answers to go on as well. So we need to put that in the chat. Am I correct, Michelle?
No, directly onto slide 7.
Directly
the link
onto
is,
the link's there, yeah.
the link.
Thank you. So if you can go and on slide 7, you'll see some little boxes. And if anyone prefers to speak, I'm more than, that's fine as well. But you can share a written response on slide 7. But I'm opening the floor up. What does a compassionate community mean to you?
Fiona, would you like me to move on to the next one?
Yeah, sorry. Yes, that'd be great. Thank you. Would anyone like to speak? What they feel is a compassionate community?
I would like to pick up the piece, as we say sometimes. I think a compassionate community is definitely aware of the trauma of the community and takes that into account of making decisions, moving forwards, staying still, having conversation. A compassionate community would definitely be aware, or at least try and have conversations about what has happened in the past, to make sure of that awareness.
Beautiful. Thanks, Kate. Anyone else?
For me, building on that, it's about trust and reciprocity, and the idea that you share your resources with that sort of open-heartedness. That for me is compassionate.
Beautiful, Louise.
I think for me,
Colin? Yep.
yeah, I think there's something about where nobody goes unnoticed.
Yeah.
And acceptance of diverse people within the community.
Beautiful. And I like that, Colin, when no one goes unnoticed. We're accepting of everybody in community. That's lovely. Great. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to it? I can hear people typing, but I can't see anything on the slide. So I'm wondering if they're going into the chat, and I'll have
There's a lot of typing going on the Google Doc.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's the Google Doc that's being shared. So there's lots of input on the Google Doc.
Ah, right.
Someone could probably share the Google Doc if you got out of your slideshow and just shared your screen with the Google Doc on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Kate, are you actually sharing direct from Google?
Okay.
I think so, but tech is not my specialty.
You shared the link. We could all just click on the link and then.
Yeah, the link's in the chat.
We can chat between.
So I'll stop sharing for a second, and I'll see if I can do that from the link from the chat.
So if I'm talking and people have their hand up, I can't see you at the moment because I've opened the document myself. So I've got you as a small window. So I love that it's a compassionate community shares resources, kindness, trust, and reciprocity. Listening. Absolutely, we do a lot of listening, and it's the listening that is intentional as well. Oh, when someone gives you a warm smile the moment they meet you, it's so lovely. That's a really beautiful, compassionate community.
Oops.
Yep, everyone is accepted. Fill each other up and develop yourself. Yes, that's great. Kate, you're right. Just pop yourself on mute and you'll get it. That's okay. It's all good. Listening, caring, being aware and sensitive, building neighborliness. I love that as well. Just only empathic sense between two or more people. That's lovely. One in which people are aware of challenges facing one another and are available to support one another. And that's what we'd like to see happen with really good neighborliness and communities. And it doesn't always happen. And when we know that people do suffer trauma and they suffer trauma in different ways, we can't always know straight away what it is that or how we need to be with those people. We have to start to build those relationships. So being aware of other people is very important as well. So thank you. And I encourage you, if you think of anything else about what a compassionate community might be or mean to you across the session we're in today, this morning, I don't know. Please feel free to go back and add anything else to that slide, because it's a document that we can, as things come up, we like to be able to talk about things as well. And I'm sure there's lots more things there as well, so that's fine. Beautiful. So we're going to move on. Oh, Rishu, that's lovely, where you can be yourself. I just saw that in the chat. So, excuse me, we might get that put on the board as well. So we're just going to move forward, and we're just going to spend a little bit of time having a look at ABCD. So Kate, if you can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we're just going to have a little bit about ABCD. And this is the Institute values you can see on the screen shared with you. So we just wanted to introduce the asset-based community development. If you don't know it, these are the principles. And from the Institute, which there's lots of ABCD practitioners around the globe, and this language is the language that we're using, and it relates to the Institute values. But I just also wanted to say to you, if you use these, you can find them on the website, but the language might not be the same for your community or make any sense to it. So basically we would say to you, please find the language that works well with you and the communities you're working with. And sometimes that might mean pictures as well. So please adapt these however, you know, when you're looking at this, just use them the way you need to use them. So basically the values are that we start with gifts, and we talk about our individual gifts and skills in community, and every person in community has them. And I'm just reflecting on that slide before, listening. There are people who are really good at listening, and there are people who need to practice at that. And we can learn from the people that are really good at the listening. So remember that that's a skill that somebody has, is to being able to listen. We like to build relationships for mutual support. So build relationships when you're working with community or in partnerships or agencies or government organisation, any of those types of things. We build our relationship to start with. And through the lens of trauma, it's much more important for communities to have people on the same page and not have to retell their stories. We find that that's a challenge in traumatic situations. So when people have to keep telling their story, it would be much better if we could share that and have that relationship with other agencies in the first place, so that we can minimise the amount of trauma that people are having to tell their stories over and over again. Value the small. Every little bit counts. If a person shows up and they've been in a position, or anybody in community, but if they actually turn up one day, if they don't speak, it doesn't matter. The fact that they're there for someone who's going through a traumatic time is a really big thing. So value those things. Remember that if a citizen, nurture citizen-led action. So thinking about that through the lens of trauma, if someone who is in a community notices or is working with other people, or they themselves would like something to happen to support them on their trauma journey and coming through that space, then let's have a look at what that means and how we can make those things come to fruition. Sometimes it might be only one or two people that initiate it, but it might have a massive effect on a much broader audience. Always look at it through working for the lens of equity and justice, and that's what ABCD does, and to include everybody. And we said that again, we said that in what is a compassionate community, and that's what it comes back down to, is if we're working for equity and justice, then everybody's included, and you can be heard and you can be seen in your community, and we are heard. And believe in possibility. And I like to link this to the small steps as well, because sometimes the possibility means you're going to take a long time, and little small steps are going to have that journey for you. They might not be great big steps, but believe in possibility, especially in community. Community has its own answers quite often. We just have to remember that we're there to support them, and we're not there to take over for them, but we want them to believe and have that positive outlook as well. Lead by stepping back. So you don't always have to be the leader. So leading by stepping back allows people who may be not often a seen or known or labelled leader, it allows them the opportunity to take the forefront and instigate and grow things. Include everyone. Inclusion is so important. Nothing about us without us in communities. And I made that statement today in a space of in a mediation space. And one of the beautiful participants in that group today, who is visually impaired, stamped his hand on the table and scared the life out of me. And he said, I've been telling everybody that. It was rather beautiful for him to hear that. He said, I've been telling everyone that. We just want to be on that journey. So it's just lovely. So these values took quite some time to grow, and they've not just come overnight. So please feel free to visit the ABCD Institute and have a look at those as well. And the next slide we'll have a look at is the top-down versus a bottom-up approach. And one of the reasons, this is one tool, there are many, many tools and practices and principles we use in our work. And this is just one of them that we thought blends really well with the trauma-informed lens and trauma-informed community building. Because if it's a top-down approach, when we look at it that way, people are starting with the answer. So, excuse me, so organisations quite often go, we know how to fix this, and they start with the answer. And then they'll go out to a few people that they know, and they'll say, we're here to fix you, and they'll implement their answer in that way. They'll go, yes, this is it. The people are doing what we said they'd do. And they look for answers to the additional problem of, you know, that's often what happens is they've started with their own answer. They've gone out there, they've implemented what they thought. And then while they're out there, they actually go, there's all these other problems. And if we'd done it the other way around, which is on the other side of the screen, which is the bottom-up approach, is if we as practitioners go into community and start with a question, or through a learning conversation and being willing to listen and learn, if we go in that way, together with our communities, we can discover what it is that people really care about, and how they view what's going on in that space as well, and what they would like to bring to be in that space. Is we can actually expose what those gifts and skills are that people in the community may have to lead to that mobilisation of assets. And we're doing it together and with community, not doing it to them. Whereas the top-down approach is they've already got the answer, and essentially they don't have the answer. So, and you can adapt this as well to how you'd like to see it used, and you can put it through different questions. But for me and the people I work with, all the people I work with, whether we're community builders or passionate about working with people for inclusion and through trauma, we ask the people first. So we ask those questions. And then the final slide that we're going to have a look at, excuse me, is, and you can see this slide for what it is. If we're taking the ABCD approach, we focus on community assets, we identify opportunities as opposed to finding problems. We are looking at an investment orientation in community, so capacity building within community rather than that charity approach of doing to people. We look at community-based organisations for grants and support, or grants and supports to community-based organisations rather than to agencies and governments. We focus on community, and the focus is on the community. And often a social services model is only an individual, one person. The solutions are determined inside community, where through an ABCD approach, whereas with a social services model, it's an outside, it's that top-down approach, that they're not necessarily people in the community living and breathing what's happening. Through the ABCD approach, the goals are self-determined, and it's coming from the individuals, and the action comes from being part of it and knowing what they need. Whereas the social services model is definitely a community services model of doing things too. People are the co-creators. We work through co-design, and we never work alone. And there's always someone else. So you can see there that as a practitioner, you've got this definite social services model where we think about the people and the way we work. Excuse me, I'm going to have to cough because I can't. I do apologise. So you can see as a practitioner as well, we are more aligned to an ABCD approach rather than a social services model. And we all come from different backgrounds, and we all come from different levels of training and or not training and lived experience. But the ABCD the strengths way of it is looking through, and more as a practitioner through asset-based community development approach to being trauma informed. So that is a bit of a fire hose edition, a little bit of a fire hose edition about ABCD and the use of it with trauma-informed community building. And yeah, I'm going to pass over to Michelle.
Thanks, Fiona. And we're going to sort of segue now into me talking about trauma-informed community building. But before I do that, just in the model that Fiona was just talking about, that community building versus social services model, it really helps us to highlight the alignment of a practitioner's approach when you're working, with community members and thinking about, am I working with the broader community, or am I there to be a case manager or to work on that one-on-one? And thinking about how we do that in a trauma-informed way. Fiona spoke a little bit about some of the tools of not asking people to tell their story multiple times, and I think that we need to remember and have a focus of the potentiality of everybody in any community we're working with having experienced trauma at some stage of their life. Sometimes it's individual it can be individual trauma, but we can also have community trauma as well. Community trauma if we've experienced a natural disaster, or if we live in a community that has been labelled as disadvantaged or low socioeconomic or deprived and things like that. Sometimes those labels that we add can exacerbate that trauma. So many years ago, I posed the question around trauma-informed community development or trauma-informed community building within the ABCD community. And that's when I discovered the work that the Bridge in San Francisco had done in low socioeconomic housing developments within San Francisco. And since then, we've been using this model and adapting it, adding our sort of our Aussie tweaks as we like to do. But it supports that notion of really, as the first principle there says, do no harm. So the principles on the screen that you're seeing come from the original work that the Bridge did, with a slight modification that we've done just in some of the wording. But the four foundational principles are what can help local leaders, organisers, facilitators, service providers integrate a trauma-informed practice into your community development work, your community organising, those activities that you're doing with, with communities or alongside communities, that really starts to help us embed this approach and be respectful of communities. We know, as Fiona said early on, the impacts of trauma can mean that people become very disengaged from processes. It can mean that participation can be hampered if we come at, communities with traditional community development models and things like that. It can also limit the impact of broader community development efforts. So the trauma-informed community building model is a really a proactive model. It assumes that communities have, common experiences and conditions, and that when we have communities fully participating, we can benefit from that sustained community development. So I'm not going to go through the slide, so to speak, but I'm going to move on to the next part, which builds on the principles that you can see here into some strategies, and what those strategies might look like from individual, interpersonal, community, and then sort of system thinking. So thinking about if we're adapting or using a trauma-informed community building approach or methodology to our work, there's thinking about it from the person or the people that we're working with, thinking about what that can look like if we start to model healthy interactions and behaviours in community, because sometimes when communities have experienced trauma, they're not very nice to each other. We've seen some of that through the pandemic. So as a worker in that space, or a community member in that space, or a leader, it's about sort of modelling those healthy behaviours and providing multiple opportunities for people to be involved. So not just running a workshop between 10 and 12 on a Monday morning when a lot of people are at work. Or bizarrely, I've worked with youth services that have only operated between 9 and 4, and wonder why no young people come and to be involved. And it's like the irony of not understanding that that's when young people are generally at school. So making sure that we have lots of opportunities. There are a whole lot of strategies there that build on those principles. And also the thing we quite often forget to do, not only as practitioners, but with communities that we're working with, is sit in that reflective process. And when we do that, we can influence systems. When we can reflect community voices and priorities to stakeholders, we can support communities to speak truth to power. We allow a space of being able to reflect, okay, we've done this, what else is possible? What are the gifts and skills that we've got in our community that we can build on? Rather than coming in with a Band-Aid to fix people asset-based community development and trauma-informed, those the two approaches together honour the experience of the individuals, of the community, but also work towards community-led change. Because as Fiona explained in that top-down, bottom-up model, if we only come to a community with the answers that we think they need, we're really setting them up to fail. You know, we're not listening to the gifts and skills that communities have, because every community has gifts, skills, resources, and sometimes we forget about it. If we're told that we're labelled that we're a disaster affected community or a low socioeconomic, we can start to think that the answers need to come from somewhere, from outside of our community, rather than how do we bring together all of those great resources that we have in our community. And that's in essence what trauma-informed community building is about, is that respecting the local knowledge, local culture, local ways of working, and coming to that in a space of, or in a mindset of creating safe spaces for people to share, and for people to be involved. So again, as I said, offering those multiple opportunities for people to be involved. So, you know, making sure that we do include everybody, as Fiona was saying. We will move on to thinking about what some of those strategies and actions might look like. So it's, you know, understanding that trauma knowledge base and building on that, understanding the difference, you know, what for us as practitioners, how does trauma play out in an individual and what might that look like in community? Also supporting capacity building within the community as well. So allowing community members or inviting community members to be a part of that. This is community development is not something that we should do to people. And if we're using a trauma-informed approach, it's absolutely not something that we're doing to community. We're supporting communities to move into a space of hope and help other possibilities emerge. We're looking at that nurturing, that social cohesion that may have fallen apart over decades due to the way that we've been labelled or treated differently by various authorities or agencies that have come in and worked with us. And also making sure that we build partnerships along the way so that there's that long-term investment in community change that is supported by community members. So as I'm talking through trauma-informed, and I will pop a link in the chat shortly of the bridge model. The original research they did, it was a research project they did back in 2014, and they did revise it in 2018, updating it. But basically, trauma-informed community building is really about broader community development decisions. It's not just based on the work that we do, it's supporting communities to be at the centre of their development. And again, Fiona said nothing about us without us, sits at the core of not only ABCD, but trauma-informed community building. We've got to understand that when we come into a community from a trauma perspective, that we're acknowledging that the community and everybody within it has potentially experienced trauma, and we need to set up the environment that creates those safe spaces and encourages participation, but also rejigs the way power might have that in the community as well. Quite often power sits with individuals that gain power from telling the stories of deprivation or the stories of how bad our community is. And that can certainly impact the way a community sees it and can embed trauma within the community. So having said all that, we're now going to take you into some breakout groups just to have a bit of a conversation around ABCD and trauma-informed community principles that we've shared, for you and your groups to have a bit of a conversation around the links or the intersectionality that you can see in those trauma-informed community building principles and the ABCD values, and what that might mean for the future of compassionate communities. So I think, Fiona, are you working on the breakout group?
They're ready to go, Michelle.
Fantastic. So when you get into your breakout group, you'll be in small groups. Introduce yourself to those that you find in the group with you, and have the conversation. And you can add some feedback on slide 14 in the slide deck that you can share just snippets of the conversation, that you're having a bit of an essence of that conversation rather than a word for word. So we'll see you back here in 20 minutes.
Suppose what they're wanting us to talk about is what we think the approach that they've outlined would mean for how we could build compassionate communities. So in communities that have faced traumatic events, and they told us about the values and the different approaches. But I think it's quite hard to discuss this in the abstract, isn't it?
Yes, I agree with you, because I don't understand what's the meaning we contribute to word trauma. But I agree with Fiona when she said about the trauma is grown up from our childhood, from our families and others. And with this meaning, we are have contacts. I think it's my little reflection about it, but I agree that it's abstract for me.
Yes, so maybe we should think of an example of a community that might have faced a trauma, and whether that's to do with war, conflict, or flooding, or earthquake, or some other event. For some small communities, I suppose, even during the COVID-19 pandemic, some people were traumatized because they lost friends and family, and people were very isolated. And I suppose this approach is very much about starting from people's strengths and accepting that some people may be struggling in some ways, but other people who are also struggling may be able to help them with certain things, and just looking out for each other and listening. I suppose with trauma, it's often not visible, and people can be isolated and mentally distressed, but other people, their neighbors, their friends, may not really know what's going on for them. So I suppose the idea of being very sensitive and listening and not pushing people too hard is quite important. But I think when they talk about compassionate communities, they're thinking about how can a whole community or a neighborhood become more compassionate. I don't know what it's like in your country. In the UK, many people, they live in a house, they have a car, they may go to work, come back, they have a gate on their garden and may not see other people. They're not looking out for them. They're not thinking about what does my next door neighbor need, or do we need a play area for the children? So I suppose it's about becoming more aware of other people. I don't know if you have any thoughts about what you heard so far in the presentation.
Yes, Sarah, thank you. I think that I catch your idea about the trauma, because yes, our country is now in a bad situation with wartime in the UK, you know the situation.
Yeah.
And we forgot about pandemic because it's just a little, it's not problem.
Yeah.
Now, yes. I agree with the approach of ABCD. They are building their projects and activity due to values. But in our approach, in our collective inclusive practices, all these words, all these details named by one word: empathy. Empathy. This is not mine, not your sense. This is a human opportunity to feel each other, and this is one of the most opportunity and ability of human to comprehend, just a minute. This word for
listening, which I think is tremendously important. But I think, like you say, Jai, I mean, that's a really good starting point. But is it sufficient, if you like? Listening is a really important skill, but and it's something that I know I feel I'd have to work on quite a lot. But I suppose, is that enough? I mean, certainly, I think, like you, I would observe a change, really, that I mean, there's something I've gone along to recently, and what I really noticed was that I think there's a really interesting small group of people. I would say, every other person there seems to me to have experienced trauma in one sort of or another, or certainly with maybe one exception or whatever. I mean, in a whole variety of ways, but just really, really difficult situations and experiences in their lives. And certainly of recent years, whenever you talk to community workers, it seems to me you get that feedback about, well, there are a lot of kind of mental health type issues around.
Yeah, we call it.
So sad to see, because educationally they're deprived as well, because they don't value anything that they learn within school, a lot of these kids. So it's not a good place to learn for those few that do want to learn. So then it perpetuates again, because people aren't trying to find an alternative. And understanding that trauma that's associated with all of that being there.
Yeah, I live in one of those communities, actually, Vic. So
Okay.
I live on the east coast of England, in a small seaside town called Great Yarmouth, and we have multi-generational unemployment, and lots of seasonal work. So aspirations here for young people are often around obtaining seasonal work and then kind of not working for 6 months of the year. And for older people now, that has a massive implication on their later life wealth and health, because they haven't got sufficient pension, private pensions, they haven't paid in
supplement what you get in the pension.
That, you know, and it's although it's a cheap place to live, there's an awful lot of, like you said, cultural deprivation and kind of issues. I love living here. I chose to live here because I'm from London and I love the beach and I love you know, I love it. There's so much here, rich history. But I think for people that don't have a choice about whether they live here or not, then it's a different feeling.
So any insights from the conversations you had in your breakout rooms? Anything that you would like to share?
Michelle, I'm happy to share, and apologies to my fellow group members because they've heard it a bit already.
Thanks, Jaya.
I just feel like as a pure community development trained practitioner, I actually don't have much understanding of trauma, and I feel that that's really missing in my practice. Yeah, I see it as something that I need to, get a better handle on.
Oh, look, I agree, Jaya. I don't think that it's given much of a focus at all. And I know when I worked for local and state government during bushfire recovery, there wasn't even any practitioner debriefing. So it was just basically off you go and do your work, and that's why we see such high burnout in people that work in disaster recovery, because we don't acknowledge that we don't have any training, and it's not really talked about that fact of that for community development workers we need to be equipped with this, because the communities that we work in will all have some level of trauma. And like somebody popped on the board there on the slide deck, that COVID has left trauma in all of our communities, and it has certainly impacted the way that I work now. Much more, there's a blend of modalities. So it's face-to-face, it's small groups, it's big groups, it's online, and having all of those offerings at various times so that the community members can participate.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Thanks, Diane. Any other feedback from any other groups?
May I say some words?
Yes, sure, please.
We have a dialogue with Sarah. Thank for her. I want to say that my reflection is I agree with others that all groups of society are traumatized, and each person who come for the support to collectives, it's very difficult and hard to work with them, and it requires from specialists, from us, a very delicate approach. And thank you for your approach, ABC approach, because it's very close to our work. And I agree with your values. Thank you very much. And I think from this session, I catch more knowledge, because if I name myself a practitioner, I need to know more and need to know how in other collectives, communities solve the essence of the problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dinara. Thanks. And I just saw Richu's comment in the chat, and it's a sad state of affairs when there is so much trauma around the world and that we all find ourselves in this space. But just in wrapping up before I hand over to Fiona, I think it's just and what we've shared is just sort of two perspectives, and we're trying to blend them because we think that they work really well together. But from a practitioner's point of view, is that understanding that the communities that we work with, if we come in with a trauma-informed perspective, we won't be as shocked by what we see. And sometimes we can label communities or people in communities as being troublesome or troublemakers, when generally it's actually the impacts of trauma that create those behaviours, those outgoing, those behaviours that we might see. And it's, so how do we create spaces so that everybody feels that they can be valued, heard, and they're not going to be asked to tell their story of trauma over and over again. So over to you, Fiona.
Thank you, Michelle. So you can see on your screen this conversation, and while you were in your rooms, we were talking as well. And it's not a conversation that I don't think I go a day we don't have, or I don't have with somebody. And it's about that listening and learning. And one of the things that we talk about is the do no harm checklist. So before we do work, and as we're planning work, and even as I'm going into my own sessions, which I know my team members would be the same, we put ourselves in a state that we know what we're going to be doing, and we're very mindful of who we're working with. So we're really clear, and we set our intention when we're going into when we're working with the community. We're making sure we're not doing it to the community. So be very clear with your communities about what you're there for. Don't overpromise things to them, because if you overpromise, it's not, when you leave, you're just leaving the community more broken. Don't work alone, work together. We co-facilitate a lot of our sessions, all of our sessions we co-facilitate. Today you're seeing 5 of us that are part of our team. And if I don't have a member of my team, I know that I've built relationships with people on the ground in my community, that if I'm doing something, I'll go to those partners. And this is where that building relationships is very important as well, so that you've got other people to work with. And I know that this may sound rather odd, but I like to work with someone who has a completely different background or completely different lens on a situation to me, because then between us, we actually see more of the picture of what is happening in that space. So don't work alone. Use clear language. So be very clear in what you're saying and take away the jargon. If you're going to use acronyms, break them down so that people understand them. And of late, I've been working on a lot of things, and thanks to Kate and having it reiterated to me about easy English, or whatever language it needs to be in, breaking it down so that it's understandable. And remember that if you are presenting documents that not everybody reads, so how else can you deliver the work? How else can you speak for other people? Go slow to go fast. So really take the time and embed in relationships and that network of partners working together, and knowing the community members and understanding for them, and making sure you can do that, because you'll get a lot further if you go slow. I love that. I think we have got a typo on that board. It actually says go slow to go fast on our board. I think we need to change that one. But be transparent, as I just was. Be very transparent. Don't hold anything back. Just be really transparent with what you're going to do and what next steps might be. And if you don't know something, be really transparent and say, actually, I don't know the answer to that. Maybe we can work it out together. So be really transparent. You can't work with communities by being in a building. You need to leave the building. You need to go out into the communities. You need to work with people and have cups of coffee and tea and share outdoor spaces with people and hear their stories in a space that they are comfortable with. It can't always be an office or in a building. Really be flexible, just flexible. That's all I can say. My mind is, my body not so flexible at the moment. And stay strengths focused. So we like to think about that and always come from that lens of a strengths-based approach, and be really grateful that people are in a space that they are able to work with you and relate to you. So for me, that's a really important part as well, is being approachable and being someone that people can trust and come to you for, especially if you're working in different cultures. And make sure you are really culturally aware of the space that you're coming from. And yeah, just really think about maybe, you know, as you're leaving and going into your work, once you've left here and going back to have conversations with people you work with, when does trauma-informed practice, you know, aim towards collective healing? And Rita, you put something in the chat about healing, you know, that we need that. We need the patience for healing, and we need all of that understanding for healing. And if we're really thinking through that trauma-informed lens, maybe that collective healing will come if we're a lot more compassionate to each other as well. So through that compassionate lens. So I'm going to hand over to Kate, who's going to just finally check us out for the night. So thank you.
You're on mute, Kate.
And that's a fine of $3. I'm sorry, everyone. So I'll start again. So thanks for coming along to our session about trauma-informed community building and the intersectionality between ABCD. Like we did the check-in earlier to bring everyone into the session, we're going to finish up our session by asking another question. So we invite you again to either write a little piece on one of these little sticky notes on the board, or you can always speak your piece as well. And the question we'll be asking you to check out today is, how can we build local resilience through strengths-based trauma-informed community building? So I open up the space to all of you to perhaps, add to the board. Or if you feel like it, speak to your piece. Michelle, would you like me to stop sharing so we can see each other, do you think?
That'd be great.
It feels strange talking to little blue boards, but a bit easier if we can see each other. Or you can add any takeaways that you've had, any aha moments that you might have had about the intersectionality that we've been speaking about.
I really resonate with somebody who's popped on there, taking that time to connect and work slowly. I think it's so important. We can tend to be, particularly if we're working for funders or that we can be so slammed for time that we try and rush things, and good community development takes time.
I think the one I resonate with too is listening and learning to understand, because it's so important to find out about the history. And that does take conversation and listening, being on the ground and actually interacting with people to find out what their story is, what their history is, and also their definition of trauma, because the definition of trauma could be all sorts of things as well. Yeah, stories. Someone's writing in their stories. And what is it that Dee always says? I think she says stories stick. And it's so true that the story is so informative. It's an important part of community building and of connecting people together, and also of learning about trauma. I love local perspectives as well, because you have to be so place-based. There's no the difference of areas and communities is so specific to the area. You have to be place-based, and you have to value that local perspective. Know yourself is a good one too. They're all fantastic. I'm gushing. But knowing yourself, how important is it to also know yourself and tell your story?
I'm just going to add, well, I'm just off mute. One of the things we talk a lot about in trauma is community preparedness. And it's something we don't really, we're only starting now to be more prepared in communities. And so if we can build that capacity in communities around trauma, that also will have an impact also, I think. And so that more understanding and more sharing about how we work in and what works well in preparedness spaces is very, very important. And I know Michelle will back that up as well. So
yeah, and like you say, learning about trauma. I think during the break we were saying how there's not a lot of training around trauma and how to be trauma informed and how to apply that to community building or any other areas that might need to be trauma informed. So having conversations with each other and learning from each other about the methods and the strategies of working through these trauma situations, like you say, helps that preparedness and capacity building. I like that one. It's very thoughtful to say, recognize what you are in the community, especially as community builders, recognizing your place and recognizing how you fit into the community. It's important. The screen's very little on mine now.
I just wanted to say it's been a really helpful prompt for me to think about our work and maybe we need to slow down and be a bit more thoughtful about and be considered around our approach and where we're working, and really equip our staff to be able to be sensitive and to be slow with building trust. And so it's been really helpful for me. Thank you for running the session, and I know that others have found it really useful as well, so thank you.
Thank you, Louise.
Well,
Thanks. Oh, sorry,
you go-
Kate.
no, you go, Michelle, all yours.
Sorry, I was just going to say thanks, Kate, and thanks everybody. We have come to the end of our session time. It's been a delight to have you all with us. And please continue the conversation because, like Richie said, it's such an important topic that, you know, all of us that go to university and study and things like that, we're never taught about this stuff. We're never taught about how to deal with, you know, trauma or whether it comes up at all. So it's a conversation that we all need to keep having. So thank you all, and thank you for joining WCDC 2022, and thank you to our hosts from Georgia and the Ukraine. And I'm just going to have a quick pitch. World Community Development Conference in 2023 is in Darwin, here in Australia. So please come and join us. I've popped some links in the chat. We are open for submissions and registration now. And we'd love to see you in Darwin, where you're not going to need to bring a jumper or a jacket with you because it's beautiful one day, perfect the next up there. It's basically 32 degrees every day. So we look forward to seeing you all in Darwin. And enjoy the rest of your day.